Ready if you are. All right, good evening, everybody. If you want to take your Bibles and turn to Genesis 4, that's where we're going to pick up. And want to make sure, kind of get a running start at this. I think one thing that will be helpful for all of us as we go through is try to keep chapter contents in our mind as we go. And that'll also be something helpful maybe we can use as a review from time to time and to kind of get a go at it. And I think that's valuable. You know, if you knew what the chapter contents were for every chapter in the Bible, you might not know exactly what the passage was, but you'd say, I know where it is. I know pretty close where it is. And that would be helpful to us. And so we're better to start than just start at the beginning. And Genesis 1 is about creation. Yeah, creation of the world, and then especially creation of humans. Chapter 2, creation of man and woman. I think we get a zoomed in look at day 6, particularly with regards to the creation of man and woman. What about chapter 3? Introduction to sin. That's right. The first sin would be a good way to remember that. You might also remember the first promise of a rescue. And it's not hard to think about the fact that if the first sin is introduced, just to remember that the first plan for rescue. And then where we are beginning tonight in chapter 4, what would be your chapter contents for that? The offspring, specifically who? Cain and Abel is kind of the dominant story of chapter 4, but it certainly does carry on, as we're going to see in verse 17. And we kind of follow Cain's path, and then in chapter 5, we're going to follow Seth's path, and we'll talk about more why that's important in just a minute. Anything up till now, anybody like to make a comment about with regard? Yeah, Mr. Raymond.
I'd like to bring up a point. When God made everything our final choice.
Yes.
Well, it's done away with the passing above or excusing somebody else and making you do it. You are absolutely responsible for what you're acting.
Yeah.
I don't care who persuades you, what it is, you should be responsible.
That's a great point. So, oftentimes, you've seen, I remember, I don't know where it was, I think it was at somebody's house I saw when I was a little kid, and it was a little stuffed devil, which, why would somebody have that? I don't know. Maybe like a Valentine's Day present or something, sometimes that, anyway, and he was holding a little heart, and it said, "The devil made me do it." You've heard that saying before, the devil made me do it. Well, as Mr. Raymond is saying, that doesn't cut it. That may be true to some extent, right? The devil may have influenced you. In fact, he's the father of lies, and he does influence and tempt people to sin. But that doesn't get us off the hook, and I think that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Raymond.
The way you can tell that is you prove all things. You prove all things. You can prove where you want to be doing it or not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if we must test what we hear and what we're tempted to do by the Scriptures. And that's our responsibility. That's right. Anything else up till now?
Yeah, you made a real good point. It kind of was right at the end, but you talked about how he even tried to throw God under the bus.
Yes.
The woman you gave me.
Right.
So that takes it to a whole new level.
It does. It does. When we use the blessings that God has given us in a bad way, and then we turn and say, well, if you hadn't given me that, I wouldn't have done it. See, that's the wrong. And I'm afraid we do that. I'm afraid we take the money and the talent and maybe the looks. Maybe some of y'all use the looks God gave. I couldn't use them for anything. And we take all of those things and we use them for bad purposes. And then we say, well, if only this or only that. And really the blame just belongs to us. It rests with us. I think that's right. Anything else so far? Yes, sir. Yeah.
I started last Wednesday night. I started saying I don't know what blame. But man, about how Cain when he went into Nav and took a wife.
Yeah.
Well, I've always heard people say, "Where did she come from? She must have already been there." And in common sense too, she couldn't have already been there because there was nowhere for her to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
God created heaven and earth, and they always say, "Well, where did she come from?" Genesis 3:20 tells us exactly where she comes from. They come from Eve. Every one of us.
Yeah, it says that Eve was the mother of all the living. That's right. And so as we come to chapter 4, I think all that's very good. What we're going to see is you have the initiation of sin, the introduction of sin. And then I like to call, really from chapter 4 all the way to chapter 11, the downward spiral of humanity. There are some speed bumps in a way, but it's mostly a downward spiral. And that really starts as we follow Cain's line in verse 17. Cain goes away, and you see that there is mercy shown to him in some ways, but also he's going to have to suffer the punishment of his murder of Abel. And it is a sad testament to human society that the first death is a murder of a brother. And that, I think, starts a theme, because when we get to chapter 6, remember what the first transgression was between brethren, and then when we get to chapter 6, I think we'll pick that up again. Anything up till now? You want to take verse 17?
Sure. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built the city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mahuiel. Mahuiel fathered Methuselah. Methuselah fathered Lamech, and Lamech took 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Do you want to go any further?
Yeah, whatever you want. That's fine right there.
Okay. So here we see the lineage of Cain, and of course, these names are pretty hard to pronounce sometimes. They're a little bit different from what we're used to. But here it gives a decline, and really we're going to see that starting in verse 23 a lot more. We're going to get a feel for the descendants of Cain, and how, as Larson said, that spiral, that fall of man is going to continue. They're going to follow in the way of their forefather Cain. But these people here, sometimes if we listen to the evolutionists, they want to portray man in his early stages as being very, very primitive and almost, Neanderthal type. But here you see people very modernized from the very beginning. You see them not only being farmers and shepherds and things of that, but here they're forging bronze and iron, and they're carrying on. I mean, these are intelligent beings. God created man an intelligent being from the word go. With his communication to Adam from the very start, Adam was very competent and intelligent to be able to understand God and converse with God. There were no Neanderthals at the very beginning, like our culture likes to sometimes portray.
So, anybody notice anything about verses 17 through 22, and really go all the way through verse 24, that's missing? What do you not see Cain and his descendants worried about? God. The name God is not mentioned in verses 17 through 24, which would be striking when you compare it to what happens in chapter 1, verse 1 through 4, verse 16. I mean, there's God's name's mentioned more than 100 times, I think, in that section. So the fact that God is not mentioned. So the very roots of human civilization, God is absent in that. And so you think about a downward spiral. Now, there's nothing wrong with having livestock and dwelling in tents and the lyre and the pipe and forging instruments of bronze and iron. But when those things are built and established, this line of people who's founding those things, they may be pioneers, they may be entrepreneurs, but they're not developing very far in the worship of God. In fact, Lamech, who is the 7th from Adam, and we're going to see over and over how significant the number 7 is in this, in the whole Bible. But the 7th often represents kind of the epitome of something, or the high point or low point in this case. And the 7th is Lamech. And what do you notice about Lamech just in the verses we've read? He has 2 wives. So this is the introduction of polygamy. I don't know that nobody else had 2 wives before then, but it seems to be that Lamech is being introduced as the person who introduces that to the world. And you need to keep in mind that the normative statement, and we've said this several times, is Genesis 2:24, that the man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two, shall be one flesh. Two shall be one flesh. Now, Lamech is introducing a derivation to that. Sometimes we struggle because we see polygamy all through the Old Testament. It is never endorsed. Almost every time it's introduced, it's simply reporting the facts. And when the facts are reported, it's almost always ending in disaster, right? And so maybe sometimes it is difficult for us to read the Old Testament because there are so many institutions and situations in which we would say, well, how could God approve of that? I'm not sure He does approve of all of it. I think what we have is a reporting of that situation, and polygamy, for one example, is never endorsed. And just about every time, whether it's with Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, or Solomon and his wives, how many times can we repeat the example of this Jacob and his wives? This does not end well, right? It ends in catastrophe most of the time.
Just a couple of chapters later.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. Do you have something, Mr. O'Malley? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good. Anytime anybody's agreeing with me, I want to make sure that gets noted. So, all right. Now, in addition to that, so we looked at verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. So what do you notice about his attitude here? He's bragging. What was that? He's not repenting. He seeks revenge, and almost he takes the place of God in this, right? God is the one who has the right to take vengeance, as we see with Cain. Cain said, God tells Cain, if somebody kills him, I'll avenge sevenfold. But he goes even beyond that, and Lamech says, if somebody hurts me, not just sevenfold, 77-fold. It's extreme, it's boastful, and it's maybe the epitome of what this line is going to be involved in, is this kind of savage violence.
But the worst part of it is, in Cain's part, God actually.
That's right.
When he begged to him about somebody would slaughter him, he told him if anybody, and he marked him, and then he told him it was 7 times. What if anybody done it would go to them. Here, Lamech, he's actually assuming to be God by making the statement of what if anybody done anything to him, it would be 70-fold. 7. And God's never mentioned that He has any kind of protection over Lamech.
Right.
But Lamech, in his proudness, is boasted that he's God, and this is what kind of security he's got because he's done killed 2 men.
That's right. All right, last couple of verses there. Adam knew his wife again. She bore a son and called his name Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also was born a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. One commentator that I read said this: while Cain's descendants were pioneering the civilized arts, but were spiritually deficient, Seth's were pioneering the worship of the Lord. And I think that's the contrast we are supposed to see. I think we're supposed to see Cain's descendants as developing in civilization, but declining in spirituality. And we're supposed to see Seth's descendants as not doing anything that's noted here as far as civilization goes, but they began to call on the name of the Lord. And I think that's that helps us as we go through the rest of not only the book of Genesis, but through the Scriptures, that we have these kind of lines being set up. I think maybe in some way this is kind of the initial process of the seed of woman and the seed of the serpent. You kind of have developing here, and ultimately that's going to be accomplished in Christ. But maybe we get a preview of that here. Anything you'd like to say through chapter 4?
Well, we don't know how many children Adam and Eve had. All we're privy to is what we're given here. Of course, if these were the only 2, thank goodness for Seth, because Cain's descendants are just spiraling.
That's right.
And so, after Adam and Eve, what would be left? Yeah. And of course, Seth and his the way he directs his descendants after him are pursuing the Lord. So
that's right. Yeah, maybe. I think Cain demonstrates himself to be somebody who was not particularly inclined to spirituality. I mean, even after God calls him out for his sin, he doesn't look like he's super penitent. He's just worried about the consequences. And that has its effect. And, it doesn't take very long when you're going just a little bit off the course. As you go down that road, pretty far down that road, you don't have to be diverting much to end up way off. And that's what happens. It doesn't take many generations for them to be, way off base.
The next generation is always pushing them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, as we come to chapter 5, we get a little bit more information in chapter 5, the first 5 verses. I don't know that it would be necessary for us to take the time to read through all of these names, and for the sake of time, it will help us to just kind of summarize chapter 5. But I do want to look at the first 5 verses, and Brother Gerald, if you'd take those.
This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So, as you said, this kind of plays out. This is almost a format of the way the rest of these are going to go. You're going to be given a father's name, his age when he fathered his first son, and then it's going to go on and so forth. And of course, there's a point to it. It's counting the descendants from Adam to the main character we get to in the next chapter.
That's right. So notice in verses 2 and 3, really verse 1, he made him in the likeness of God. Right? We talked about image bearing. Notice that verse 3, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image. And I think the emphasis there is even though mankind is sinful, they have not lost the fact that they are made in the image of God. And we'll see that again in chapter 9 and verse 6 with the punishment when it comes to murder. If anybody murders, their life is taken because they're made in God's image. And so that's being emphasized, that we need to keep in mind that even though sin fractures or mars or darkens the image of God in us, doesn't allow us to reflect God as well as we ought to, that doesn't mean we're not image bearers. We are image bearers, and we just may not be doing a very good job of that. And then you see at the end of verse 5, and he died. You're going to see a theme. The end of verse 8, and he died. The end of verse 11, and he died. The end of verse 14, and he died. The end of verse 17, and he died. Verse 20, and he died. We're going to skip a few, but down in verse 27, Methuselah lived 969 years, which is the longest on the list, but what happened? He died. And then all the days of Lamech, and he died.
Yeah, but in verse 24, he didn't die.
That is true. What do you notice about all those fellows, though? They did die. I think the reason that it's repeated, it is not repeated that way in the other genealogies. Like when we get to Genesis 11, even though it's almost exactly the same format, that's not repeated. Because I think by that point, maybe we get the point. But this is demonstrating the consequences of what happened in chapter 3. When you eat of that, you will die. Well, let me make that point over and over. And it doesn't matter if you live 969 years like Methuselah. It's going to come. It's going to happen. Except for one, as Mr. Steve made mention in the list. And who was that? Enoch. Now, does anybody know how many he was away from Adam through Seth? He was the 7th. I think I heard it. Yeah. So he was the 7th. So the 7th through Cain, who do you have? Lamech. Bad dude. 7th through Seth, who do you have? Good. Enoch. Walks with God. And so maybe there is a point being made here about the representation of these two lines. So that when we come to Enoch and we have one who walks with God, this is more characteristic of that family line than it is of the Cain line. And in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 5, we get more clarity. By faith, Enoch was not, for God took him so that he did not die, because he walked with God. And he did that by faith.
And he had, I've never looked at it until I read verse 23. I mean,
even though Enoch walked with God, he was on the earth for 365 years that he walked with God.
Yeah.
You know, I've always, in studies and class and sermons, heard that he walked with God and took him. But I never did actually look at the verse before that he had walked with God on earth for 365 years. I mean, that's saying a lot, considering Cain's group on earth that was wicked, and Enoch chose to do God's commandment and walk righteously to the point that God took him.
Yeah, in the midst of that wicked world, people can still be faithful. That's good. All right. Anything through chapter 5? Anything else you'd like to make mention of?
You know, you notice everybody is living a long lifespan.
That's right.
900, probably, you know, somewhere around 900 years, of course, with the exception of Enoch and maybe Lamech, a little bit shy of that. But everybody is living, and it's hard not to maybe assume that this process was necessary for the population to be able to grow and expand and get to where it is by Noah's day.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. And I think that maybe one of the consequences of the flood may be a reduction in that. It depends on how you might take, let's see, verse 3 of chapter 6, and we'll talk about that. That's not exactly the view I have, but I think that it may help explain that a little bit. Anything through chapter 5? It's worthwhile looking at these names and looking at this genealogy. Ultimately, I want you to see that we are focusing on Seth's. Now, at this point, I don't know that you would know that. You've got Cain's line and you've got Seth's line, about the same amount of information. But it won't take very long before we're following Seth's line more closely, and we just leave Cain's line in the background. Well, there won't be much of Cain's line, not after a while.
Not after the next story.
Yeah, not after the next story. But then we're going to continue narrowing down like a funnel until we get more specific, because we're still looking for a particular offspring. We're looking for a seed, and so we'll follow that line.
So this morning, when we were away, we were visiting with the East Alabama congregation.
Yeah.
And they were beginning a gospel meeting, and man, the Bible class lesson that he taught was why we need the Bible, why we need God's Word. And he had several points there. The first one was to know God, but the second one was to know ourselves. Mm-hmm. And one of the main points that he made there about knowing ourselves is through what the Bible teaches us is that we're going to die. Mm-hmm. And he used this very passage right here to show what Gerald was talking about. No matter how long you live, and I think you touched on this last time, not going to get around dying.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. The one exception will be if we're here when the Lord returns, but that would be it. Okay. Anything else through chapter 5? Okay. So chapter 6 through chapter 9 forms a unit. So if we've got our chapter contents, chapter 5 is going to be the generations of Seth. I think or the descendants of Seth would be a good way of remembering chapter 5. We come to chapter 6, and it's one of the more famous stories and infamous, depending on what circles you're running in. But it will be the story of Noah and the flood. So chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, kind of set up the background for this, and I think are difficult in their own way. And so we'll kind of read it and talk about what some of the options are as far as this goes. So chapter 6, verse 1. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Okay, when we come to chapter 6, you've got these two groups mentioned, the sons of God and the daughters of men. Who are we talking about?
The daughters of men, the daughters is of Eve.
Yeah.
And the sons of God is actually fallen angels. Because when you took an eternal being that had been cast out, and the sin that they committed with it, taking wives, they had giants.
Yeah.
The Nephilim, or
Yes.
whatever you call
Right.
them. And archaeologists digs before the flood level that are down below the flood level. There at one time, I mean, in the museums and Smithsonian institutions and everywhere across the world. And when you're talking about giants, they're anywhere from 7 foot all the way up to 32-foot skeletons below the flood level that they have excavated up, and they put them in these museums. So the giants was more than just like a 7-foot being. I mean, you take something up that's 35 foot tall.
Yeah.
That's way out of the normal of actually being humans.
Yeah. So one option, one view of this passage is that the sons of God are angels who, and so the interpretation would be is that when the New Testament talks about the angels leaving their proper domain, that this is what it's talking about. That is one option. The difficulty I have with that option, and I don't know that there's a view that I think answers all the questions. A difficulty with that option is we've not been introduced to that at all in the text. What would be the connection? And where is it after this? Like, where does that pick up later to tell us why? And so, like, let's say that this is fallen angels that are committing this transgression. Well, it's humanity that's punished for it, not angels. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm not sure how that storyline falls. That is a prevalent view. And the book of First Enoch, which was written in the years of silence, took that description, and so we'll put a pin in that. There's another view, and this is maybe a more, anybody know what the other view is?
The righteous.
The righteous. The sons of God would be the descendants of Seth, and the daughters of men would be the descendants of Cain. Now, in favor of that view is that it connects us to what was just before it, right? Mm-hmm. Contextually, it makes sense. And then we continue to see that kind of division as we move forward, because you're always going to have the righteous and the wicked, and that kind of connects us as we go. And it explains how the world got so corrupted. Well, why didn't Seth's line kind of balance out Cain's line? Well, it didn't, because the sons of God married the daughters of men, and they were pulled away by that. That's another view. I think those are probably the two most prominent views. The challenge is we can't say, well, maybe it was both. Because in one situation, the sons of God were really bad, and in the other one, they were really good. And we can't, there's not really a middle of the road idea. One view that I've heard lately that I think might have some merit to it is that sometimes the kings of the ancient Near East would refer to themselves as the Son of God, that they would, like the Pharaoh would say he was deity in bodily form. So he'd call himself the Son of God. So maybe what we're talking about here are like warlords, early kings who would be taking the daughters of men, and this is why the violence increases on the earth. I like that view. I'm not sure that I'm convinced by it, but I think there are at least 3 options out there. There's probably more than that. Now, here's the real question. So sometimes the question comes up, well, if the sons of God are the righteous and the daughters of men are the descendants of Cain and they're wicked, then where do the Nephilim come in? What would you say to that? It seems to me that there's nothing explicit that says the Nephilim are the offspring of this relationship. It just says they were in the earth in those days. In fact, it says, and they bore children to them, and then referring back to the Nephilim, these were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. It was during the time where the daughters of men and the sons of God were getting together that the Nephilim were through the earth. And the word Nephilim can be translated giants, but it also can be translated tyrants or oppressors. And the reason that makes sense, right? Because if they're the biggest dudes around, then they're going to be the tyrants. So they're going to be the oppressors. And you can see why that word would be shared. All that is to say is that there are good options for what it might be. I think the one with the righteous and the wicked might make the most sense in the context, but I'm not going to arm wrestle anybody over it. I do think that one point in favor of it being the angels is that in 2 Peter and in Jude, when it traces, it mentions the angels who sinned, and then it goes to the flood, and then it goes to Sodom and Gomorrah, that it seems like it fits right in there. So that would be a view on the table. Last time I taught this, I just said the righteous and the wicked point of view. And over time, I've been kind of moved away from being so definitive on that. So I just wanted that to be as unclear as possible in as we get started.
I think they were just trying to, the story just trying to show you that people were not living the way God wanted them
Yes.
to live.
I think that's right. I think that's exactly the point. And so then when we come to verse 5, the Lord sees that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The situation that is created, regardless of how this happens, is it could not get any worse, right? We're as bad as it gets. All right. I kind of dominated that discussion, but
Well, the only other thing I would add as far as whether this was angels that came down, Jesus taught that marriage was given in, for this realm, this life. It did not extend into that realm.
Yep.
So I would have trouble with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Based
We're not even
upon
sure
that.
about the mechanics of that.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
On the word Son of God,
Yeah.
it's also used as an angelic host in the heavenly courts in Job's 1, verse 6, 2,
Yes.
verse 1, and 38, verse 7.
Yes, that is true.
So that actually, to me, if it's reused, the sons of God, it's not actually talking about the righteous on earth, that it's actually from
Yeah. Well,
heaven
I'll say this.
sons of God.
That Son of God is used in different places to mean different things. For example, Psalm 2, God says, "You are my son, today I've begotten you." And the Hebrew writer uses that to say, he didn't ever say it in that way to the angels, right? "You are my son," in that way. That there's something different about the son that's being spoken about in Psalm 2, and that's the King of Israel. And ultimately, that King of Israel points to the Son of God, Jesus. So I think when a similar term is used, I think we should give that a lot of weight, but I think we should also consider different contexts with the way those terms are used.
But
So,
wouldn't it also reference to, if you actually looked at the Hebrew word that's in Job, and the
Yeah.
Hebrew word that's used in Genesis?
So what I would say about that is Hebrew is just like English in the sense that just because we use a similar word doesn't always mean we mean the same thing by it. And so anyway, I think we put forward the three views that are possible. And we just have to say, maybe that's the best we can do about that, and just kind of I think verse 3 is the emphasis here. "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. God's not going to put up with this wickedness. He's not going to allow humanity to corrupt the world to this point. And I think the emphasis of the 120 years is not that people will stop living 120 years, because Abraham will live 175 right after, but that's how long till the flood comes.
This is the countdown.
That's the countdown. My spirit will endure with them 120 years. So what does that indicate on God's part? What do we see about, what do we learn about God just from those verses?
He's tired of the sin.
He's tired of sin, right? So we see judgment. I think we might use the word grief as we look at the later text. What else do we see about him? He's merciful, right? He does not say, well, first generation of sin, let me strike that. We're at least 10 generations down already, and then he says 120 years. And so there's a time of patience that is present. And we see that in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 20. Peter references this occasion and says God was patient in the days of Noah. And Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Okay.
And warning,
Warning people.
Noah's going to play that instrument of warning to the people that this is coming.
Yeah. And they won't heed. So in verse 5, as we've already read, Joe, do you want to pick up through verse 6 and maybe read through verse 8?
The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So here we see that what are thoughts and intentions of man continually? It's evil. We live in a time, and boy, it seems bad, but there are still, we see good people out in the world. You know, this seems to depict a different picture to me. I don't know if it does you or not, but where nobody is thinking about spiritual things. Nobody is thinking about godly things, and their hearts are continually on evil, whether it means that they're just out trying to advance themselves, trying to promote themselves, or if they're like, well, we just read, who was it that struck a man for Lamech? You know, if everybody is that way, you know, it just paints a very dark, gloomy picture here of what the population is at this point in time. And typically when we see that word but, it always seems like it takes a negative turn. But on this occasion, it's a positive, because God is looking to destroy everything. But what's man's saving grace here? It lies in Noah. And why is that? Yeah,
He's righteous.
righteous. And you know, he's going to become an example throughout Bible history on how, you know, God will not condemn the righteous with the wicked. He knows how to preserve the righteous from the wicked when he casts judgment upon them.
That's right. So when we think about God destroying the world, I think maybe it is hard for us sometimes to wrap our minds around how God could do something like that, because I assume there were children on earth at the time, and we know that there were 8 souls that were saved. This is what. So how could God do that? I read an illustration. I think it was yesterday as I was preparing, and it noticed that the terms used here for God mostly are about grief and regret and sorrow. And I think there's wrath involved. I think there's judgment involved. There's no doubt about that. But the primary term that's used here is one of sorrow. And I think that's interesting. And an illustration that I heard that I thought was effective here is that this is about rescuing what can be saved out of this. And so let me see if this illustration makes sense. Let's imagine that there's a mother who is expecting a baby, and she is diagnosed with a terminal illness, and within a month she'll be gone. But the baby can be saved. But the surgery to save the baby is going to cost her her life. What do you think those parents are going to do? They're going to save the baby, right? They're going to recognize, look, this is the only hope to bring something good out of this situation. Now, that hits close to home for a lot of reasons. So, but I want you to think about that. If God does not intervene here, what's going to happen to the world? It's all going to be lost, right? God's plan is going to be destroyed one way or the other in this situation. If we're allowing this to go down, if Noah is where all the hope is riding, what happens when Noah's gone, right? Now, if that's what's happening, then when God says, when He grievingly says, I'm going to have to end this so that something good can come out of it, I think we can look at it in at least a slightly better light. And here's the thing, we don't have the perspective God does on all that. If we're going to judge God's actions, we got to stand where God stands, and we can't do that. And so we just have to do the best we can with what we've got revealed to us. And the idea here, now, is God angry about their sin? Yes. I won't put up with it any longer, I think is the attitude. But angry in the sense that He regrets that they have done it. And it might be hard for us to think about God regretting, God changing His mind, God being sorry about something. But what makes God sorry? Did something change in God's nature? Something change in God's character? It was man, right? So God is like the sun, right? And we experience God depending on which direction we're turned to Him, right? We are either towards Him and receiving His warmth and light, or we're away from Him and we experience darkness and wrath. God doesn't change. He remains constant. And so in the sense of His regret, His attitude changes based on man's action. And in this case, it's regret. And I love the fact, when we think about the flood, we ought to think primarily about judgment and destruction. And yet it's on this occasion the first time the word grace is used, word favor is used. In the midst of judgment, God will remember mercy. That's what Hosea prayed. In judgment, remember mercy. And He always does. And He always does.
You know, not only did He found favor in Noah, but you go on further down, when God regretted what he done. I mean, when the Israelites, after he done got them out of bondage, he had regretted by the way they were doing, to the point that Moses told him, you know, you don't need to wipe these people out. These are your chosen ones. If you're going to do anything, do it to me. And then God relented on wiping the whole race out. So there's times, even after with Christ, if it hadn't been the mediators that has went before God to plead for mankind, we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, that's right.
Think about the children, if they're living in a world that's corrupt, it's violent.
Yeah.
That would be a horrible life for them.
I agree.
I'm not trying to,
No.
I'm not God. I'm not trying to,
No, I agree.
just look at it.
So if we look at it at only as a life under the sun perspective, we might say, how in the world could God do that? But because we believe that God is in control of these things, what do we believe happened to those children? They're with him, right? And because of that, they did not die in one sense. They changed locations. And if they had grown up in that world, who's to say that they might not follow in the pattern of their parents? In fact, that's all indications are, is that's what's going to happen.
Right.
That's why the righteous versus the unrighteous point of view
That's right.
makes so much more sense to me as this story begins to unfold. Because you're down to 8 people here.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, there had to have been more than that at one time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can tell that the influence that evil have had on that people, you can see what it's done, and that's going to continue if God doesn't, like you said, intervene here.
That's right. That's right. So would it be all right if we summarize the end of chapter 6? This is the story of the building of the ark, or the information about the building of the ark, and we can go through the measurements and all that. What I want you to think about is Noah finding grace in God's eyes. What does that mean? What did God do for Noah because Noah found grace? He saved him. So what does that salvation involve? How did he save him? He gave him a plan. All right? Well, first of all, he warned him that a flood was coming, right? That's grace. That's grace to know that a flood is coming. A warning about what's coming in the future of judgment. That's a gift. That's favor. And then he gave him a plan. He gave him a plan. He did not say, Noah, flood's coming. Good luck. Right? He said, Noah, a flood is coming, and here's what I want you to do. And here's the other thing. He did not expect Noah to fix all the problems in the world. Could Noah have done it? It sounds to me like he tried for 120 years to preach and to get people to repent, and they wouldn't have it. And God does not hold Noah accountable for not being able to fix the world. What he does hold him accountable for is responding to the instructions that he'd been given. And that's grace. And I think we can think a lot about that in the situation that we're in right now. What does God's grace mean for us? It means there's a warning about judgment that's coming, and there's instructions about what to do. And we might look around at the world and we may say, I don't think we're as bad as where Noah is yet. There's more than 8 people here tonight. But we might look around and we might say the world is getting worse and worse. And I think some consolation that we have is God understands. God knows. And he will not hold us accountable because we can't turn the world around. But what he does hold us accountable for is being that remnant, is being those people who, finding grace in his eyes, follow the instructions. And what we do is, like Noah and like the ark, was a beacon of hope, was an opportunity for the world. I think there was a welcome made, and we don't have a lot of specifics on that. But what's Noah preaching if it's not to escape from the judgment that's coming, either here or in eternity? And so I think there's something to be said for all that. And so you can think about the size of the ark and all the things like that.
With the other part, the need to know about Noah, about not only did he find favor, but when God gives him the plan and tells him what to do, and he tells him that there's going to be the destruction by flood. From what you read from there all the way back to Genesis, there'd never been rain. God provided, it's like dew come up from the ground that watered all the plants. And he believed him to the point when he told him that he was going to flood the earth and it was going to be all washed away, that he needed to build this ark.
Yeah.
That he trusted in God when he told him that,
Yeah.
instead of some kind of excuses.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
I like Hebrews 11, verse 7. By faith, Noah moved with fear to the building of an ark to the saving of his household. By faith, he trusted what God said. He obeyed. He built an ark, and in doing so, he was able to save his house. And you see that at the end of chapter 6, verse 22. He did all that God commanded him. You have anything you'd like to say about those instructions?
You know, they're in some ways they're very specific.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, why would he command them to make it out one specific wood?
Right.
But other than, will you follow my
That's right.
my lead on this? Will you obey me?
Yeah, I love that. And it's specific, and he leaves Noah with the responsibility to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were different options, I guess. God could have just wiped everybody out and started all over. He could have said, well, I'm not going to wipe everybody out, but I'm going to do it all for Noah. I'm going to just build him an ark and stick him in it. That's not what he did. He gave him the instructions and said, now it's riding on you. And it seems to me that in every age, God never just takes it out of our hands completely, because he made a world in which he wanted to entrust us with the care of it. So whether it's Abraham, or whether it's the children of Israel, or whether it's Christians, he has always said, look, I've got a plan, and I'm going to accomplish my purposes, but I'm putting that in your hands to some extent. And so God provided what Noah could not: protection, warning, instructions. But he did not provide what Noah could provide, and that is obedience. He didn't do that part for him. And maybe that's a lesson. That's right. Yes. Yeah, I love that in verse 18. I will establish my covenant with you. That is maybe the summary of God's grace. He's made an agreement with him. And then when Noah does what he says, when God remembers him, that's grace too. And we'll notice more of that next time. Thank y'all very much for your comments. And we will move forward or something next time.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.